Good evening, whichever it happens to be. Roy, like always, one of the things we do here is debate. And Roy says, is it evening or is it afternoon? It beats me, so we'll call it both. Good afternoon, good evening, whatever suits you. Welcome, please, to our members and our guests for the Baltimore Council on Foreign Affairs. And we welcome you to the session on the Baltimore miracle. Not an exaggeration, the miraculous reopening of the Baltimore shipping channel in just 11 weeks. And the Secretary will help us understand how all that happened in just 11 weeks later this evening. I'm Robbie Harris, the Chairman of the Board of Trustees. We welcome you here this evening. Many thanks to Roy Gutman, the President and CEO of the Council. I appreciate Roy giving me the opportunity to moderate tonight. I'll mention that, I don't know, it must have been shortly after the bridge, after the shipping channel reopened. I said to Roy, this is a rare example of a success story in America. There are others, but there are not a lot. And this is one of those success stories, and it would be, I think, advantageous for all of us to understand how this story happened and happens so very, very well. And the Secretary is going to help us understand that tonight, and we thank him very much for that. Before we launch into this evening's session, let me mention that our next session, which will be held here, will be held on the 9th of April, when two distinguished speakers will help us understand the impacts of the dismantling of the USAID. Now, I want to put this in context. Our speakers are not going to talk about how awful all of that is. Our speakers are going to talk about the impact on their organization for the cutbacks that are anticipated. The impacts on their organization, not globally. And so that is important. And again, that will be on the 9th of April, and that will happen right here in the downtown Baltimore. But on the 5th of April, a couple of days before, we will hold our first Academic World Quest competition here in this building. And I'm going to ask Henry Silverman, who a member of our board, who is making the Academic World Quest happen. Henry, would you please explain what Academic World Quest is?
Sure. Thank you. So it's a high school competition in foreign affairs, and we're going to have about 5 high schools and 7 teams in this room, and it's a fast-paced competition, 10 rounds of 10 questions, and the winner will go to the national event on April 28th. So please join us on April 5th, and it's going to be a very exciting event, and we'll have lunch as well. Hope to see you there. Thank you. Thank you.
Henry, I thank you. I'll just add to that. The winner of the competition here, among those, I think it's 4 or 5 schools, the winner of that competition will then go down to D.C., I think you said on the 28th of April.
That's right.
And they will compete nationally against the winners from the other schools around the country. And I'll also point out that this is not an inexpensive operation to run, this competition. And we're able to do that because of the generosity of our members. And we thank those members very, very much for doing that. Thank you, Henry.
Thank you.
Good.
Okay. Hope to see you there. Don't forget.
Okay. Let me remind our virtual audience out there, the Zoom audience, please, I know there are going to be a number of questions and comments tonight. Please submit your questions and comments using the question and answer feature of Zoom. use the question and answer feature of Zoom, and here is the plan we will follow tonight. We will ask those who are here in person to walk over to the microphone to my right, your left, and to read your question to the secretary. And then we will do a virtual question, and the secretary will answer it. And Roy and I have a couple of questions of our own, which we will do. So I think we will have a rich interchange after the secretary speaks tonight. But now it's my honor to introduce this evening's speaker, Paul Wiedefeld, Maryland's Transportation Secretary. He has more than 40 years of experience in the public and private sectors. He previously led the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, the BWI Thurgood Marshall Airport, and the Maryland Transit Administration. As Maryland's Secretary of Transportation, he is rebuilding the state's top-class multimodal transportation system by focusing on safety and connecting Marylanders to life's opportunities. It's our pleasure to welcome the Secretary. Mr. Secretary, over to you.
Great. Good evening, and thank you for inviting me, Robbie. I appreciate that, and for the opportunity. I did want to introduce two people, if I could. One of the, Jonathan Daniels, the head of the Port of Baltimore for us, and Bruce Gardner, the head of the Maryland Transportation Authority. Now, what's interesting is both of these gentlemen started their jobs about a few months before the bridge collapsed, so they were introduced to our world pretty quickly. What I thought I'd do is three things. I thought I'd talk a little bit about day one, when the bridge collapsed, which really is about 72 hours, to be frank, for us. And then sort of where we are today, both in terms of the port itself, traffic and congestion and things of that sort, and then where we are on rebuilding the bridge. And then I thought I'd wrap up with talking a little bit about the finances, both of the bridge and the larger finances of the department, because eventually that impacts the Port of Baltimore and everything else we do for the economy of the state. There is one quote here that the governor had, which I really think just sort of sums it up, which is, that this was earned, meaning took so many, literally thousands of people to do what was achieved in the 11 weeks, which people were talking about. It would take 11 months to open up the Port of Baltimore, and I think that quote really hits him. I thought I'd just give you, just for those that make sure we all understand where we are. So the Francis Scott Key Bridge obviously is at the base of this slide, and then you can see everything pretty much in the port activity was trapped to the north of it, except for Trade Point Atlantic, was just to the east there, and basically, but the issue there is their draft is much shallower than the main channel, so there was limited things we could do there. So the port was basically not closed, but under tremendous stress. The other thing to note is the traffic. So on the Francis Scott Key Bridge, roughly 39,000 passenger or cars a day, average daily traffic. The three crossings roughly do about 250,000 traffic a day of vehicles. So in effect, we've lost 15% of the system. And to compound that issue that is where hazardous materials and wide loads had to go. Since they can't go through either tunnel, that means their only options go on the west side of the Beltway, which then compounds the issue both locally for us and then also up and down the East Coast, because that's where a lot of those trucks are headed. So that's just to give you the bearings of what I'm talking about here. And with that, I'll give a little bit on day one. Just very quickly, Bruce and I, we got the call about 1:50 or so in the morning. And having been in this business for a while, generally the first thing we hear is wrong. It's not that. And I was hoping this one was wrong, but it wasn't, is the reality. And as we were both racing to the site, and we were listening to the police and things like that, we knew it was for real. There were some misinformation or different thoughts of what had caused it initially, but then obviously that came to light very quickly. And I think this one photo, particularly the lower right-hand side there, this is basically the full force of the federal government there. You have Buttigieg, the Secretary of Transportation at the time. Further in the background is the head of Federal Highway Administration. The entire federal delegation was here. And really, you can almost see the shock on their face, as we're all trying to come to grips. This was shortly in the morning where we're just trying to give the lay of the land to the different stakeholders. And obviously, you can see the type of interest across the world in this instance. So with that, we'll do a little video to give you a little bit better feel of day one.
It felt like several days that first day.
The first thing, there's a level of disbelief.
I mean, the bridge is still on the boat.
Yes.
Like a large amount of it.
Yeah.
This is unprecedented.
Wow. Horrible, man.
Knowing that there were millions of Marylanders who were about to wake up and realize something that was so certain to them, which is that the Key Bridge would be there the next morning, that was not going to be the case, and just realize the daunting task that we had ahead of us.
It was both devastating and unbelievable to just imagine this not there any longer. Obviously, it's in the middle of the night, a lot of uncertainty with what's happening, just visually, even what's happening, but just total unbelief.
I was the person who was on call that entire week, and I remember at 1:46 in the morning, I got a phone call from our dispatch that said that there was a partial or full collapse of the Key Bridge. And what I remember from that call was that after he said that, the dispatcher goes, "We heard it." And there was that weird, timbre in his voice, was like something was up.
The first time I saw what had happened was probably like most other people. It was the YouTube video that was out there. I saw that at 4 a.m. on the cell phone, and it was surreal too. I mean, it just, as many people have said, it just looked like it was a movie set and not something that really could have happened.
I think it was.
That video that everyone's seen hit X Twitter. And that was the moment I looked at my boss and went, the entire bridge is gone. That was the moment in my mind where I realized that the world has changed, that MDTA has changed, that Maryland has changed, that Baltimore has changed. That was, it's not just a partial collapse, not something that we can repair in a week or a day, that this was a disaster.
I remember when I first saw the wreckage, it took my breath away. I thought about, and I was looking at all the divers and the workers who were in the water, knowing that they were searching for individuals who we ended up losing. That we saw just how many people were out there standing from their porches and looking and trying to get an understanding of what happened.
We lost 6 people that day. And that's something, every time that I look at the gaping hole in the Baltimore landscape, I think about those 6 people, because they started their day doing what hundreds of people across the MDTA and MDOT do every day, which is repairing the roads so that they're safe for other people to drive on. Their day started out normal, and their families' days ended horribly.
It just reinforces, the danger a lot of our workers face every day. We saw it on the Beltway almost a year prior to this event at the Key Bridge.
The parallel between these two tragedies is haunting and unsettling. Both occurred on Interstate 695. Both happened almost exactly a year apart. Both claimed the lives of 6 dedicated transportation workers.
We work in a dangerous environment. A lot of our workers, a lot of our contractors, and we've always got to do everything possible we can to protect them.
My job was to keep the press where they were supposed to be, to keep them informed, which at that time we didn't know how many press we were getting. They started coming around 3 o'clock, and they kept coming, and then they kept coming, and they kept coming, and they kept coming. And so all of a sudden we got press from France, press from Spain, press from Japan, Russia.
To have factual, timely, empathetic, and constant and consistent communication from leaders, from community folks, it meant the world. It actually kept people from panicking.
The leadership that was exhibited by Governor Moore, the establishment of his 4 priorities, making sure it was, again, mission first, but people always.
And making sure that you knew that no one was going to be left behind. And so getting that economy going, making sure that those families got the supports that they needed and the closure that they needed, making sure that our workers did not have undue harm to them and their families when they did nothing wrong, and making sure that one day people could look up and see that Francis Scott Key Bridge. Those became the North Stars that we focused on, and I believed, as I still believe, that in those moments of crisis, you have to be able to present calm and courage in that.
Obviously, the incident command, the initial effort of it was how we did it. But basically every morning we started off at the first thing in the morning. We had a very set agenda. We kept it very focused.
I had just been here for 40 days, but I'd known a lot of the senior leaders. So there was a trust in that they knew their jobs and what they did. So a lot of that came together kind of just because you have a group of professionals and they know what you're doing.
I have never seen a team or a group come together and cooperate and communicate like this team did. From that first moment, the unified command, the way that the Coast Guard came in, the Army Corps of Engineers, and then bringing the salvage companies together. Every day that everybody walked into that cruise terminal that became the incident command center, egos were left at the door. It didn't matter the rank, it didn't matter the expertise. Everybody came together, and that's rare.
The response of everyone, just unbelievable how people just said, no, we have a mission here, we're going to go after it, and that's what they did. A lot of people putting their own lives at risk to try to deal with some of the issues that we're dealing with.
When people told us it would take 11 months, we got it done in 11 weeks. And what I'm most proud of is we got it done without a single injury.
As the governor mentioned, and it was mentioned in the video, there were 4 directives from the governor. The first being recovery of the victims and closure for the families, and that was the primary focus. The second was to clear the channel as quickly as possible to get the business back up and running, to take care of those that had been impacted, whether it was people that worked at the port or people that their businesses depend upon the port, whether it's someone selling in a deli to someone that's putting cars together. And then finally, rebuilding the bridge. So it was the North Star of the entire organization and of the entire effort. The amazing thing about what happened was the immediate response that did occur from across the board, from everyone that you can imagine. And it really started, in my mind, from the call, from the pilot to the dispatch at the Transportation Authority. So basically, here you are at 1:30 something in the morning. You get a call that something's just hit the bridge, and it's in the middle of the night. And maybe your first response is, this can't be real, but it wasn't. They immediately sent out the alert to the police to stop traffic. And the interesting thing is the NTSB comes in and they do these investigations very quickly. And one of the first things they do is do a timeline of every single thing to see if they can find anything that way. And from the moment that we received the call, the dispatchers received the call, to the moment we stopped all traffic was 100 seconds. And when they initially saw that in the report, they thought it was a mistake. They thought you missed a colon somewhere. It should have been 10 minutes, but it was 100 seconds. And that meant that saved lots and lots of lives. But it happened at that instant. And then you had police officers that basically, we have a Marine unit that Bruce manages, that basically got into that water not knowing what they were facing at all in terms of the danger of the actual what was out there. But even, at that moment in time, my mind, and I'm sure many others, leapt to terrorism. When you think of a structure of that nature coming down, so all things are racing through your head at that point. But our people didn't blink, and then just kept building and building and building forward. And as Jonathan mentioned, it was unified command. I think we have the tremendous benefit in the state of Maryland when we have a consolidated Department of Transportation where all of our modes are under one roof. So basically, the Port Transportation Authority, the Highway Administration, the Transit, MVA, we all answer one. They all answer through the Secretary's office. So that way we didn't have any turf issues. As you can imagine, if these were separate authorities, they may want to protect their own interests. So we had to, in fact, we had to educate the federal players to a little bit of that because they weren't used to that. So no, we're all on the same page, and obviously with the governor's leadership, that's how we attacked the entire issue. So where are we now? Let's first start with the port itself. The Port of Baltimore is doing well. Would be doing much better, to be frank, if we didn't lose that portion of time. But it is doing well, and we anticipate it will go further. Obviously, a lot of things are happening 40 miles from here, but we will work through that as well, like we work through everything else. Another big part of the future of the Port of Baltimore is the Howard Street Tunnel. With the double stacking of that has been actually accelerated by CSX. Initially, that was going to take longer. They've reached a deal where they're doing some double stacking through a northern route right now, which allowed them to shut down the tunnel totally, and they anticipate getting that done by the end of the calendar year, which opens up tremendous opportunities for the Port of Baltimore into the future. Add to that Trade Point Atlantic and all the things that they have planned there, Ports America, what they do for us at the Port of Baltimore, so in a very good position that way. In terms of the cruise side, we just signed a 5-year deal with Carnival Cruise. Again, a commitment to the Port of Baltimore. One of the experiences, or one of the things we did learn with the collapse of the bridge was how much people love to cruise out of Baltimore versus other places up and down the East Coast, both in terms of how we treat the people, the access to it, how convenient it is, and it's just a much better experience for them. So we heard that from the cruise lines themselves and from the customers. They were thrilled to be back. In terms of traffic, I'm sure maybe some of you may have experienced this. The reality is you can't take 15% of the network away and you cannot replace the 15%. It's just impossible. So what we've had to do is manage traffic, and that's really been our focus. And so we have been working very closely with both local governments, the regional entities here as well, and some of the basic things that we have to do. So for instance, we're monitoring the traffic lights and the timing of those to see if we can make things move smoother. We basically are particularly watching truck traffic to make sure they're not going through communities. We have instituted, we don't do any major construction, scheduled construction on any of the facilities during peak periods. We basically have incident response teams in place throughout the entire system because when an incident occurs, the quicker you clean that up, you can get the traffic moving. Bruce and his team has done some things at the Harbor Tunnel where they've realigned the entrance to the tunnel to try to get that smoother. But again, to be frank, it's very, very tough when you lose 15% of the volume of your capacity. And it almost gets exponential. It's just not a clear 15% because everyone that slows down, gets further and further slows down. So particularly Wednesdays are our worst day. It builds through the week. It peaks on Wednesday. Easily another half hour, to do any traffic through the Baltimore region. I live in Taos, so it would take me up to 2 hours to get home from Annapolis, for instance. It took me 40 plus minutes to get here today from the airport, which is, just not the norm. But so we'll continue to work that to do the best. We also look to the business community to help us with that, anything they can do on their work schedules to spread out the demand. But that is the reality of what we have on the traffic side. And I wish I could do more, and we'll continue to try, but it is the reality. Now turning to the bridge itself, this is a video of the existing bridge. And there's the new bridge. So quite the facility. So we've been working very hard to get this moving as quickly as possible as we can. Bruce and his team have been doing a fantastic job. We have a Kiewitz, our contractor, to do the bridge. So the governor's has really asked us to get this thing done as quickly as possible, as you can imagine. So the next slide gives a little bit of some of the details of the bridge. It is different than what was there before. Obviously, it will be built to the standards of today. That was a 50-year-old bridge, so the lanes will be much wider. There'll be shoulder lanes that can deal with a broken down car, things of that sort. The facility will be higher by almost 300 feet. The piers will be roughly 600 feet versus 300, whatever it was before. The distance between the piers will be significantly wider. Obviously, that's because of the structure itself, but it also gives you additional passageway for vessels to clear under the bridge. A little bit longer bridge as well, and we think a bridge that reflects well on the community as we do that. So if I could, I'll also go to the third element, which is really the finances and how we do all that. The one good thing about the way the Transportation Authority works, it's a closed system. Basically, it gets all its revenues through the tolls it collects. That's how we build things, how we maintain and we operate it. So obviously, we've taken a financial hit with the loss of revenue. We're picking some of that up through the two tunnels, but not all of it. So the way that this works is we did get emergency relief funding from the federal government in the $60 million range to help us do the initial work. One of the things that we did do is we actually mobilized some of our immediate resources. We had a contractor on board that had equipment to clear the channel, one at Curtis Bay, so basically inside of the basin here, because you couldn't get to it, so they could clear things that way. And then we pulled up equipment from the Nice Bridge that they were working down in Southern Maryland, brought that up. And we had that basically roughly in less than 24 hours. And so we had the first equipment there. And the way that it works is the Coast Guard is responsible for between the piers, where the 50-foot channel is, and we're responsible for everything on the outside. So we got right to work on the outside, and that was important because that allowed the emergency equipment to start to get through and did allow some of the commerce to get out of the Port of Baltimore. Again, a concerted effort by everyone to do that. So they're funded separately. They're not part of the Transportation Trust Fund, which funds everything else in the department, meaning highways, transit, the port, BWI Airport, and the Motor Vehicle Administration, and a third of the WMATA system. We pay for a third of that. That all comes out of the trust fund. So in terms of the Transportation Authority, eventually that will work through the tolling system, whatever comes down the road with that, because we have to cover debt, we have to cover our ongoing cost. We are focusing on basically recovering the cost of all of our damages from those that caused the damage. So that will be our focus. Whatever isn't covered by that, we also had insurance for roughly $350 million, so that'll be applied to it. Some of it was a revenue base and some of it was infrastructure replacement, but the cost is so much larger, it covered the full 350. And then we have a commitment from the federal government to make up 100% of whatever's not covered by those other sources. The way this works is basically we do the work, and we basically it's reimbursed from the federal government. So we don't get money. We basically do the work. We submit a bill, and generally it's almost like a year lag time, to be frank, to get those dollars back. So it's a big cash flow issue that Bruce and his team will work through. And then I did want to turn to the department's budget because that's important too, because eventually that particularly is very important to the Port of Baltimore. And so the way that works is, again, that we collect our revenues through users, whether it's your titling tax or your registration or motor fuel tax and some other sources. And then we basically have a significant hole in our budget that we came out with in the early fall that showed a $1.3 billion hole in the budget, which meant we could not do many projects and had to pull back on services. The governor's proposed to basically fill that gap and build our budget back up to $21 billion over the 6 years. We spend roughly about $3 billion a year on the capital side, $3 billion a year on the operating side is our budget. And so to do that, we will generate roughly $420 million with the sources that we've identified for consideration by the legislature. But that then allows us to pull down federal dollars to the tune of almost $700 million a year that we can then deliver. So that lets us do projects like I-81 and US 15 in the western part of Maryland, very congested areas, very unsafe facilities out there that need to be done. It allows us to rebuild the light rail system here in Baltimore, which is basically aged out, has to be totally rebuilt. It allows us to do system preservation, it allows us to do operations, it allows us to keep our bond rating, because we sell debt, we have certain covenants we have to meet there. It allows us to do that as well. So the only thing I would ask, let me just real quick to some of the sources so you do understand that. Two major sources really. One is what we call new retail delivery fee. The logic being that all those things that you're getting delivered to your house, they reuse the facilities, they wear down the facilities, the trucks, and the personal deliveries to your houses. So we're looking to add a 75-cent fee per transaction, not per product you buy, but if you make a transaction and you order 10 things, you just pay 75 cents. So don't do 10 different orders, just as a little hint to you. Do them once. And the other major source is the vehicle trade-in. So if you're buying a $50,000 car and you have $10,000 trade-in, you only pay taxes today on $40,000. What this would do is you would pay taxes on the full $50,000 unless you're trading a car of $15,000 or lower. Then you would still get that trade-in value, obviously to deal with that part of the community. So that's what is proposed. So anything that, if you have any interest in the future of the transportation system, we would love to hear from you. There is a group that is organized to do this. Again, it allows us to do some of the things that I just mentioned. It's called Maryland Moves. And to be frank, this is the time to get involved because basically we got less than 10 days, right, in the session. And this is when these decisions will be made. And unfortunately, if we don't get those dollars, we'll have to revisit the entire capital program and assess that. So with that, I will take questions or however you would like to handle it.
And let me take the advantage of the chair and ask the first question. And that has to do with the coordination among all the agencies that was involved in this recovery. The U.S. Coast Guard, the Army Corps of Engineers, the Maryland Department of Commerce, Maryland Department of Transportation. I guess even the Navy and Lord knows how many other organizations were involved in this. How did you pull it off? What was this is to me the most impressive and amazing part of the recovery, of how you coordinated all those agencies, and there must have been a secret sauce of some sort that led to this coordination. What was that secret sauce?
Well, it started literally the moment after the bridge collapsed. We were trained in incident command, basically set up incident command, and just a way for those that aren't aware of that process. So any incident that occurs, the first, in effect, person there is in charge, right? So it's generally law enforcement, or maybe a firefighter, depending on the situation. And then that just continues to build and build and build and build and build. And basically it has nothing to do with rank. It's like who has the most talent to deal with the issue immediately in front of them. So that's what we initially started at the Transportation Authority's police headquarters, where literally we had set up a table that's larger than this room that basically had all the players start to fill in. And then it started to build, and then it shifted, so it was moving towards, obviously, the recovery. So that was the main focus. So we had the state police with their divers and some of our people. They were, in effect, in charge. But meanwhile, all the other elements are there. So we're dealing with traffic. We're looking at, potential terrorism. We're looking at environmental issues. All those players are coming in through the night. To basically, and now, so like for instance, if there had been a large oil spill, then that person would have all of a sudden been in charge, right? Because that would have been now the primary focus. And that's the way we're trained to do it. And then literally overnight, as the Navy came in, and particularly the Coast Guard was running it, because they were then the expert, right? So then so that we set up unified command. But that was done where it was not going to be the Coast Guard running it, but it was going to be all the players, the major players. So basically you had the Coast Guard there, you had the Corps of Engineers, you had the Maryland Department of Environment, in case there was anything from that perspective. You had the Maryland State Police, who was doing the recovery of the individuals. You had our forces, the Department of Transportation, the Transportation Authority, and then you had the owner of the Dolly, a representative of the owner of Dolly there. So that was, in effect, the unified command structure. And then we would meet. I started our own. It was interesting. The first meeting that I had with my staff, to be frank, we were all still in a state of shock, but moving. And the first meeting we had was a little bit too hectic for me. So I created, this is the agenda, and we're going to hit this every day at 7 in the morning where we go. And then unified command, we did this was like our internal, like what do we know? And then we went to unified command, and that's where the governor, the mayor, the county executive are there. It's being chaired by the Coast Guard. All of our people are there, and basically just purely open communication. And it was very clear, from the governor's perspective and everyone on that unified command, that we don't have time, energy to waste on any of these other, things that you can get into. So any turf issues, any worried about funding issues, any of that was just off the table. Then the other thing that we were very fortunate to have is we had tremendous support out of the White House. So we met several times, the governor and I, at the White House, where things that maybe would have taken lots and lots of days or time were done in minutes, because we had that level of commitment from the head of OMB, the head of the chief of staff for the president himself. So that, and obviously the Secretary of Transportation, the head of the Navy. So all those people were all committed, and that's really what made this happen so quickly. Is we never had any discussion about turf. Wait a minute, what are you doing? I should be doing that. Any of that effort. If I had resources, we threw them at them. If they had resources, they threw it at us, both in terms of talent and physical equipment. I can tell you, we had roughly about 500 people or so in the cruise terminal every day, and they had all broken into pods in effect, and they all had just tremendous talent, worldwide talent, that I've never seen. Where they're thinking about a situation that literally was extremely dangerous, given the tension, given the unknowns of what they were dealing with, and the fear was that we would lose someone trying to do what we're trying to do. So we had, they had expert upon expert upon expert working through every element of this exercise in front of us.
It sounds as though from phase to phase to phase, there was one organization or one person who was in charge, depending on what phase you're in. Is that correct or not?
Yes and no. I mean, you definitely had accountability to do things. So, for instance, you mentioned it was an all-state government effort. So, the Department of Labor, right, for instance, Commerce, across the board, we had people that basically engaged to help whatever their specialty was. And then we had people that we had to go to Annapolis, and we set up a program to basically provide support, financial support for these individuals. Worked very closely with labor, and they were part of the team to work through those issues. So again, it was just taking that approach that we're all in this together. We're going to figure this out together. And I really cannot think of a moment where there was any type of conflict. Really, it was always so mission focused.
That's very impressive. At the end of the day, though, there must have been one person for whom this is where the buck stops, right here.
The governor.
Was that the governor? Or who
Oh
was
no,
that?
definitely the governor. That was definitely the governor. I mean, the governor was. I don't know if you've had many dealings with the governor, but he's both a very personal and passionate person, and that's the way he felt about this.
Wow.
I mean, it was personal to him. So he came at it that way. He came at it. Obviously, he's a very methodical and trained individual. With his career in the Army, so he thinks a certain way. I think the team worked with him very well, with his team and our team. And so obviously he was the lead, but he did it through encouragement and through partnership, saying, this is a partnership. I'm not in charge, but yet he was in charge. So I think that really carried the day for them to see that, for everyone to see that this is the way we're going to do this.
Most impressive. There must be questions out here in the in-person audience.
Maybe a difficult question, but political climate has changed quite a bit since the bridge came down. What's your confidence that the federal government will have any interest in helping Maryland, a democratic state, out and meeting any of its obligations?
Mr. Secretary, you might repeat the question.
What do you think of political suicide? No. The question is, what do we feel about the future of potential federal funding? Congress passed basically a law that says that it will be funded at 100%, again, with those caveats already mentioned, that the first call is the people that cause the problem. They're to pay. Obviously, we have insurance. That will be used. But whatever isn't covered by that is the federal government says they will support. What's interesting about this situation, you know, the federal government has this thing called emergency relief program. So if there's a hurricane or a fire somewhere in the country, basically they have a budget, particularly the Federal Highway Administration has a budget to deal with issues they have to deal with. They don't have enough money in the budget to cover all the things they have to have, right? But they have this budget. So what they've committed to is that we will keep filling that budget to meet your need as it comes along. That's what was passed. So we are assuming that commitment will be met, as it is in other parts of the country. The other thing that's kind of unique about this one, unlike a hurricane where you can't go after anybody for the cost of it, we have the ability to go after people that basically cause the issue. So that's a little different in this situation that we're under.
So I'm fascinated by the figure you gave of the warning time as the bridge was being hit of 100 seconds. How did that work? Has it always been 100 seconds? How did you set that up, or was it set up before you came? And the second question is, I think one of the bridge repair people survived, if I understand. What happened to him? What's the story?
Sure. So the 100 seconds is literally, you know, again, when the NTSB does their timeline, they looked at when the dispatch received the call, and then to the point where we stopped the traffic going to the bridge, and that's the 100 seconds. So that's how long it took to do that, which is phenomenal. Just thinking. Now, we were very fortunate. We were doing some work on that bridge, so we had police nearby to deal with traffic. So they were there, but they, again, immediately reacted to their training, and that's what they did. And in terms of the gentleman that was saved, it was by one of the Transportation Authority police officers, two Transportation Police Authority officials, who recovered him at holding on to rebarb on remnants of the bridge, and pulled him to safety. I don't know his current, I haven't spoken to him directly yet, recently.
How is the Department of Transportation, because there's a lot of talk of environmental issues and releasing carbon emissions into the atmosphere, especially when constructing things. Is there plans to keep sort of environmental concerns in mind when constructing the new Key Bridge? And if there is, how much money is that going to cost?
I don't have a figure on money, but I mean, we have to. I mean, it's under federal law that you have to do this stuff. We are committed to it. You know, the state of Maryland is very committed to both climate and anything from an environmental perspective. So I don't see anything there right now. There will be, you know, construction's construction. There's no doubt about it. There will be noise, you know, as we do the work. But I also feel we've been working very, very closely with the community to keep them informed of where we're in the process, to keep them engaged. We are going to engage with them on some of the aesthetic issues with the bridge, and the structural issues are the structural issues. But there's definitely avenues there for them to get engaged with what it looks like. Light, if you've looked at bridges across the globe now, lighting is a big element of bridges, for instance. How you paint it, all those things are important, particularly for something that, again, you know, if you look out there, imagine something that's 600 feet tall. Now you have two very large structures that are coming there.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I work for background. I work for a freight forwarder that specializes in the import and export of automobiles. Our top customers are Caterpillar, Stellantis, Jeep. So of course, Port of Baltimore is very important to us.
Sure.
I was very excited about the double stack rail, but I'm pessimistic about the current trade wars, let's say. And so we've downgraded our budget projections for 2025, specifically as it comes to automobiles. I'm just curious what the plan is, as someone who loves Baltimore, for the Port of Baltimore to stay relevant moving forward?
The way what I keep going back to is business loves certainty and they hate uncertainty, right? So that will play out, as we're all watching. So it is uncertain right now, but I'm not quite sure all the cards have been played yet. I don't know where this is going. I don't think you do either. So all we can do is prepare as best we can. Obviously, make the case, but it's not just a Baltimore issue, as you know. This is a national/international issue that'll play out over the next few months, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, the economy of this state and the economy of every state in this union is the more certainty you have, the stronger the economy, the more uncertainty you have, the weaker.
Is there any chance for a cross Chesapeake ferry?
Being looked at is one of the options, yes.
Mr. Secretary, in your briefing, you mentioned the Howard Street Tunnel project. Please first explain to everybody what the Howard Street Tunnel project is and what is the status of it right now.
Sure. So Howard Street Tunnel, it's owned by CSX. We are partnering with them on funding the double stacking. So that's a bridge from the 1850s or 60s, I can't remember. So basically it doesn't have the clearance to do the double stacking. So in effect, they're lowering it both in Baltimore. They've done, I think, 16 bridges. I forget what the number is, up and down between here and Philadelphia to get the clearances to do that. They've accomplished all those bridges, I think just about all of them now. And then the last is the tunnel itself. There was consider risk at that because they were having trouble. How are they going to do that project without shutting down their entire business? Right, so that was the issue. So they were looking at windows of opportunity to do that, close it for maybe 24 or 48, whatever hours a week, try to push all the traffic when they're not doing the work and then do it. But then they worked with Norfolk Southern, right? Yeah, to create basically a northern route. It's slower, but at least you can do double stacking to the north and to the west by going north. So that allowed them, in effect, to close down the tunnel, get in there and do the work much quicker and much cheaper. So we had a $60 million commitment. I can remember the commitment was in that range that we were partnering with them on. So that is fantastic news. And right now the schedule's for the end of the calendar year to have that. I think at one time we were probably looking at 2028. So this is moving.
Thank you. Several years ago, your predecessor, the director of the port, briefed the council on that project. As I recall, help me with this, the project is intended, right now, the freight trains going through the tunnel can only be single stacked. And the goal is to be able to have, I guess, two-level track stacks for the freight train to go through that. So that project is still ongoing, is that correct?
Yeah, that's the one I just referred to. That is the project.
Outstanding.
That. Yep.
Another point that you mentioned in your briefing, and that is the funding. And of course, just last week, I guess last Friday morning, the federal continuing resolution was passed. I'm guessing that there's no money for the bridge in that. Is that correct?
There was, yes, the 100% commitment was passed, and that was continued with the continuing resolution.
Please say that again.
All right, so when Congress, again, they have this big pot of money that's called for emergency relief. And so we're eligible for that money. And they said for this project, meaning the Francis Scott Key Bridge, it'll be up to 100% of whatever doesn't get covered by those other sources. Mm-hmm. So that was in the current budget. Then the budget was coming to an end, and then they did continuing resolution until October, right? I think is where they landed. So that means it's covered through October.
Outstanding.
Okay.
So I'd like to get back to the aftermath, and not the immediate aftermath, but from how we got from those few days to where we are now. We all followed it in the newspapers and various outlets about what was happening, but it seems to me there were lots of decisions to be made about how to even attack the problem. You had to float the dolly. You had to do stuff about infrastructure, stuff was underneath. Can you give us a little insight into how that process evolved and when you realized the sequence of things that had to be done, that sort of thing?
Sure. One of the biggest things is, and I think was in one of the graphics, is the technology they used to basically determine what was below the waterline. And what they found was the structure. And again, you would think the bridge is just laying there. It wasn't. It was literally sunk into the muck of the harbor, which created its own set of challenges. It was under tremendous tension. So that was one of the things. One of the slides showed someone cutting this steel. Well, that became an option that no longer existed, because when you got to the dolly, the tension of that twist, that's when they went to the explosives. So then they had to test all the different ways they could do that and basically rehearse that. And then then they found issues. They found the dolly was starting to drift. So then they basically filled it up, right, to have it sink further, and then had to pump all that out to move it. So literally, it was just, again, I said it was a 24/7 operation. They would learn more, they would rethink how to do something, they would challenge themselves, and then do this. And I'm talking particularly the Corps of Engineers, because this is a tremendous engineering perspective. And then you had the physical part of it. And then you had to make sure that, right, how do we do this? How do we train the people? How do we alert them? They had people go down there, and again, I'm sure you've seen this and heard this, so they could see about that far in front of them. And literally they were touching it by hand to basically graphically show where this is. Now they had technology too to help them with that. But that's the type of thing, that's how slow it moved at one point, in effect. But all that data, they just kept getting data and data and data. And again, as I mentioned, you had the world's best there working through this. And as the governor said, and to do all that and not injure someone is just amazing with something that was just so unknown. So it was every day was that. Every day. You learn a little bit more, you learn something, weather changed, something would change and you had to adjust. But again, the same way with us, with our people, the same thing that we were doing.
Hi, Glenn Johnston, Stevenson University. So I'm a historian, historian of the port in particular. I'm searching for the great white whale. This will be a somewhat long question to which you can probably provide a one-word answer. In order to accurately write history, we're dependent upon data and evidence. In the same way that intelligence is dependent upon good data, so is history. The number of agencies, corporations that worked in the recovery of the port is myriad. Question: does anyone in state government have the proverbial list of who those government organizations and corporations were who helped in the recovery? That's the white whale.
Yes.
Next question.
No. I mean, yes. I mean, actually, in Unified Command, they basically, you had an ID or something, and you just couldn't walk in there. So we had everyone that was going to be there. Mm-hmm. So we have a total list of anyone that was involved with Unified Command. But we also have all the other efforts that we did that maybe weren't involved with the day-to-day Unified Command. So for instance, in the Labor Department and some of the things they were doing with the trade organizations, for instance. So we can pull all that together for you for histories. That's right.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
My name is Carl Kilhofer. I'm a member of the board here. The prior bridge was 4 lanes, 2 each way. You indicated that the lifespan of this bridge is going to be 100 years. We're going to need another 8 lanes. What is it planned to accommodate the additional traffic?
It will be built with a similar number of lanes. They will be different because you will have a much wider bridge from that perspective. So you have 10-foot shoulders and things like that I mentioned, which then again helps with traffic. We don't have numbers that support a much larger bridge like that, and we also have a schedule. We have a need that if you go with a totally different bridge there, either in a location or a scale of size like you're mentioning, then you are basically getting beyond the footprint of what the bridge was, and then you are into a whole nother process The gentleman asked about environmental. That's where you have to get, most likely you would have to do a full EIS, environmental impact statement. So that is also a consideration. But that bridge can handle quite a bit more, even though it handled 39,000. A bridge of that scale can handle quite a bit more traffic, particularly if it's designed well with where people feel they can maintain their speed, which gets more difficult when it's a more narrow bridge.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, the question that comes to my mind, I live in Annapolis, and of course the Bay Bridge is down there. What is being done, or is anything being done to protect the Bay Bridge down there from the same sort of problem that led to the falling of this bridge out here?
So, you know, what we have to follow is whatever the current international standards are for protecting bridges. So that's what we will do. If a bridge has been built in the past, you don't have to meet that standard. Obviously, if you do anything new, you have to meet that standard. We do have dollars in our budget right now to investigate that. Are there other things we can do there? But we have not done anything yet until we finish that study.
Thank you. Last question. Roy's staff, namely Aaron Muser, who is back there, he did some research for us. And Aaron found that the top international trading partners for the Port of Baltimore are Canada, Mexico, and Canada, and China, which happen to be the targeted countries for the tariffs. What, if these tariffs really take effect, what effect will they have on the Port of Baltimore?
We had an experience several years ago when there were some tariffs against China products, and it obviously impacted the Port of Baltimore. So we would all have to watch that very closely. But again, that is a national/international issue that we all will be dealing with one way or the other.
Mr. Secretary, I want to thank you not only for this evening briefing, which was simply outstanding, but I'll go back to the point we've been talking about all evening, and that is the secret sauce that led to the Baltimore miracle. There's no question in my mind that the person who mixed that special sauce is seated right here. And Mr. Secretary, we thank you very, very much.